Hi, welcome to South Carolina Social Studies, and today we are going to be looking again at the 13 colonies. This should help you out on some of your research as well as on your presentation and help you study when the time comes. First up, we have the Southern colonies. As you can see here, there's Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Each founded for a separate reason, but joined together they are the Southern colonies. And to review, the first city that was established in the New World by the English was Jamestown. Again, it was the first permanent settlement in the New World, so that's very important for you to know. They were established back in 1607, and in 1609, 1610, remember we talked about that winter was very hard for them, but that following spring, they discovered tobacco. All right, so London Company started this Headright System, which we'll find out more about later on, to attract more settlers to the area. So they started a Headright System. The system gave land to anyone who paid their own or someone else's passage to the New World. So you got land if you paid for your own passage or someone else's passage to the New World. Large plantations were established because of it. So if you had enough people that came there, you could actually set up a large plantation because they give you land. Native Americans were not happy with the English for taking more land for tobacco planting. So remember we talked about earlier that those things caused war between the Europeans and the Native Americans. Native Americans only believed in using the land that you needed it. Nobody owned it. But of course, Europeans wanted to own the land. Okay? All right, up next. We have labor, so people had to work the land once they had these large plantations. So Virginia started with indentured servants. Again, an indentured servant is someone who works for a period of time and then they're let go. They can go and do what they please to do at that particular moment in time. So they might work for about 7 years or so, but after that, they don't have to work anymore for that person. By 1619, the Virginians turned to slaves for labor. So they turned to slavery for labor. There is a difference between slavery and indentured servitude. Indentured servants, again, work for a period of time and then they're let go. Slavery, you work for life and you're not paid. So the Virginians used African slaves, as we can see in this picture off to the side, to help plant and harvest their tobacco. The House of Burgesses. Now, every colony had its own system of government, but the London Company set up the House of Burgesses so the colonists could have a voice in government. It was a representative democracy. That means it was a government for the people, by the people, but they had representation to actually go to these particular houses and govern and make up rules for the colony. It followed the tradition of the English Magna Carta. Jamestown established the pattern of other southern colonies. So other southern colonies also had houses where they would have representation for the common folk. So a little bit about the southern colonies. Their religion. You have Baptists primarily and Anglicans primarily living in the southern colonies. The economy and the cash crops. Tobacco, rice in South Carolina, and indigo. The last two were South Carolina cash crops, rice and indigo. And going back to the religion, the Anglican Church actually became the official church of South Carolina. You'll learn more about that later. So who founded the southern colonies and why? These are just a few. So most wanted economic prosperity. For instance, in South Carolina, the proprietors that founded South Carolina wanted to charge a quit rent, or they wanted to have people pay rent for the land that they gave them. So they wanted economic prosperity. More wanted religious freedom. For example, Maryland was a colony established for the Catholic religion, where they could go and worship freely. Georgia was a buffer colony to stop Spanish attacks from Florida on South Carolina. So they set up Georgia, or carved out that land that we now know as Georgia, to actually stop people from coming from Florida, the Spanish from attacking from Florida up into South Carolina. So it was a buffer colony. The New England colonies. Those include New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. It was established as a religious haven for those who were persecuted in England. So if you wanted your religion or you wanted to worship freely, more than likely you were a New Englander who came over when they established these colonies. First up, we have the Pilgrims in New England. So they were separatists, also called separatists or pilgrims, and they landed at Plymouth Rock after the signing of the Mayflower Compact. It was an idea that the people formed the government, and that came from the Mayflower Compact. So the people formed the government, which is very important in the history of the United States because, as you can see, or as we'll learn later, the people actually formed the government in the United States. And that idea, again, came from the Mayflower Compact. At first, these pilgrims struggled, but the Native Americans showed them how to plant corn and how to survive. So this is where we have the first Thanksgiving that came from these particular people, because they gave thanks because they finally were able to survive in the New World. They never prospered, though, but they survived, okay? So these were the Pilgrims. The Puritans were the next group. They landed in Massachusetts Bay. They invested in their own joint stock company and brought their charter with them to the New World. So they brought their own set of rules to the New World with them when they came. They formed a democratic form of government. It included town meetings and a general assembly. All male members of this particular religion could vote. Their economy. They cut down lumber. They built ships. They fished. And they traded. So again, their economy was lumber harvesting, shipbuilding, fishing, and trade. So more about the Puritans in New England. They established schools because they wanted their children to learn how to read the Bible. They supported religious conformity, or they wanted everyone to obey the rules or conform to the rules. Any dissenter or someone who did not agree, someone who disagrees with you or disagree with this religion were exiled, or they were made to leave to other parts of the region. So you see the Puritans start to spread out in the New England colonies. They also had large families. And these large families spread to other areas of New England, taking their religion and their government with them. So this was called religious homogeneity, which means they shared the same religion within a group. Okay, so even though they moved away, they still shared the same religion. Their economy was based on trade, and they also had a form of democratic government. So we can really start to see the democracy start to form in the United States with the Pilgrims and with the Puritans, as well as with the people in Virginia and Jamestown and in the southern colonies. The middle colonies. Let's look at the little lady again. So again, we have the middle colonies. So the middle colonial settlers, they had the greatest diversity of people and religions in the British colonies. You have the Dutch who settled New York, the Swedes who settled Delaware, the English Puritans were there. Then you had English Quakers. Okay, they all settled in these middle colonies. One set of the diverse groups that was there was the Quakers. So they were religious dissenters who believed everyone had an inner light. They promoted religious tolerance and good relations with Native Americans. So they believed that you needed to get along with the people who were there first. King Charles II gave William Penn land as a repayment for a family debt. So Penn was a proprietor, and he could name the governor of the colony. So he could say, this person is actually going to rule, is going to be the governor for this particular colony. A proprietor, which is a word we'll talk about a little bit more, because South Carolina was a proprietary colony and had 8 proprietors. Pennsylvania only had 1. And just a little bit about King Charles II. So his father, King Charles I, actually had his head cut off during the Revolution in England, and Oliver Cromwell took over. But they restored his son, Charles II, to the throne. So if you're loyal to your king and loyal to your country, the king gave you things. So one of the things that King Charles II gave William Penn was some land as a repayment for a debt that he owed them. So he took that land and went over to the New World. All right, so here we have it. Government and economy. They had a representative assembly in these colonies. So Pennsylvania, New York, Delaware, etc. They had representative government. These colonies were founded for profit, so they wanted to make money. They also had good harbors and fertile fields, so they were able to grow things. So they were also able to ship things in and out, so there were good harbors there. If you think about New York Harbor and other areas that sit along those particular regions where we know ships come in and they undock their goods and everything like that. So it was also known as the breadbasket of the colonies because they supplied a lot of the food for the colonies. I hope you enjoyed this little short overview of the 13 colonies. Please make sure you answer the questions that are on that paper on the desk.